This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 6 amazing people. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, Liminality, 36 Dingo, and Michael Fritzky. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And for the third time, we are back with Travis Watson. Hey, Travis.
Hey, we're starting to make a habit of this, right?
I'm good with that.
How much Sasquatch can we talk about? A lot, apparently.
Yes, apparently quite a bit, especially with the way you write.
Oh, we've been having a good time with this book, and I think we're actually going to get to the end of it today.
Yes, one way or the other, we're getting to the end of it today. And then, when you have your Wilderness Poltergeist book, we're going to do like an 18-part show.
Yeah, I'm sure that one's going to end up being very where did the road go worthy.
Yeah. This is kind of like when I said to Mike Clelland and Aaron Gullius, hey, let's do a show on UFO history.
Oh my goodness.
And then we were like,
how many episodes was that?
I don't even know anymore. It just kept going. We're like, okay, well, I guess we have to do a part 2. Oh, we did 10 years. Okay, maybe a part 3. Okay, let's just keep going until we're done.
Yeah. And that's I am way the heck down the whole rabbit hole with poltergeists right now.
Yeah.
And I've been researching some interesting cases, and I think that we're going to have a very good time talking about that book when it comes out.
Good. But let's finish talking about this one. We were up to Nova Scotia.
We were.
And this is out of your book, Sasquatch Canada, by the way, in case anyone missed it.
Yeah, Sasquatch Canada, W.T. Watson, that's me. I go by, I use the initials for my writing stuff, but I generally go by Travis. So it's just another way that I can be mysterious. So as I mentioned in previous episodes, when I first set out to investigate strangeness in Canada, I quickly discovered that if I wanted to write a book about or if I wanted to keep the book I was writing, which was Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, down to a reasonable size, I was going to have to skip things like hauntings and Sasquatch. Yeah. Because those two things are enough to do a book on all by themselves. In fact, hauntings in Canada, I could probably do east and west or something.
Right.
But, that's, who knows, maybe someday. I got my plate full right now. So as I started to do the research for this book, because I decided that I wanted to investigate some Sasquatch stuff, and everything that I was finding was about British Columbia. So Sasquatch Canada focuses on Sasquatch sightings outside of British Columbia, because that by itself could be a book. There's something like 400 sightings in British Columbia in the BFRO database. So, yeah. And then if I started digging into newspaper stuff, I'm sure I could write a whole big old book about just British Columbia. But what I discovered was that there were Sasquatch sightings in almost every province in Canada, at least some historical mention of Sasquatch. The only place that I didn't find a sighting was Nunavut, and for reasons that we've discussed in prior episodes, which will give you some motivation to listen to the prior episodes. So Nova Scotia is an island, but it does have a Sasquatch history, along with having some really interesting fairy lore. But yeah, we talked about that in the Monsters and Mysteries book.
Yeah, that's the one where the forest moved.
Mm-hmm. No, that was Newfoundland.
Oh, that was Newfoundland. Okay,
that was Newfoundland. Yeah, but the one of the fun things in Nova Scotia was the Phantom Train.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Had a cool Phantom Train, and there's also a Phantom ship that's very evident there. And again, that'll give you motivation to listen to the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries episodes of Where Did the Road Go?
Absolutely.
Anyway, so we're in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is a place that's got its fair share of weirdness. But this particular sighting comes from 1913, and I got this from a newspaper article. It's the Thornburg Post, for those who are interested. And the reporter, I'm just going to read this to you because it's just, I love the way they phrase stuff in these old newspaper articles. So, in its sleepy black backwaters of Picton County, something has been raiding chicken coops and stealing milk from the cows. Talk about fairies.
Yeah.
But anyway, Mrs. Irwin McKay, a resident of Marsh Road, told this writer that there's something evil out there, something big and shadowy, and it scares the bejeebers out of me. A tour of the area yielded a large number of footprints, which were very large, up to 15 inches in length, and were clearly made by something heavy. Mavis Merriweather, and I love this part, a local widower, told us that the creature comes from the marsh at night and retreats there before dawn. She further stated that that great beast carried off my beau 3 fortnights ago, and he hasn't been seen since. It's scary up here at night alone, she explained. Upon review of local historical documents, it seems that the beast is seen for a year or two every 50 years. It comes, causes a ruckus, and then is gone. In this reporter's opinion, it's best to leave such mysteries alone and hope no harm comes to those living nearby, which I thought was a really funny way to end this after he just told us that this widow had her beau stolen away by one of these creatures 3 fortnights ago. It's like, I think that's a little late for that, buddy. And again, I, of course, being a Fortean and being interested in all the weirdness, couldn't help but notice the whole thing about stealing milk from cows, which is a classic thing that you find in fairy lore. Which brings you to the idea of, what is Sasquatch? Maybe Sasquatch is a species of fae. Yeah, absolutely. That's an idea that I actually used in a novel, but that's another story altogether. In my one published novel, the Sasquatch are a tribe of wild fae who end up helping the hero of the book out at the end.
Oh, nice.
But so it was fun to write about the big people. So this one is, like I said, there's a whole section in Canadian Monsters and Mysteries that deals with fairy lore, but it should be noted that whole business of stealing milk from cows is a classic thing that we see all throughout fairy lore, all throughout the Celtic lands particularly.
Yes. Yeah.
It's also interesting that I'm presuming Mrs. Merriweather was telling people that this thing was coming out of the marsh and that it would come out at night and then it would go back during the daytime. Now, my question is, okay, how do we know that? Did somebody see this creature actually coming out of the marsh and going back into the marsh, or did they just assume that that's what happened? Yeah. There's a lot in this article that's kind of, okay, the guy's, he has this witness who says there's something evil out there and it's big and shadowy and it scares the jeebers out of me. They found big footprints, another one of those hallmarks of Sasquatch, encounters. But then we've got all this stuff about, he comes out of the woods at night and then he goes back in before the dawn and, he snatched my beau up and took him away. And it's like, okay, well, did you see this happen?
Yeah.
How come we don't get more detail here?
And why is there not a missing person report?
Yeah. And if you review the local historical documents, the beast seems to appear for a year or two every 50 years. Yeah. It's like, okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Why? Right. Why every 50 years? It's one of those weird little, high strangeness things that, it's like, so do these creatures have like a reproductive cycle and they're only active like, every 50 years or so? They get old enough to actually go out and start stealing people's, boyfriends and stuff. It's one of those accounts that just makes you go, okay, I'd really like to talk to these people and find out what the hell they actually saw.
Maybe every 50 years the stars are right and the gate opens and you lose your boyfriend and a couple of chickens.
Mm-hmm. Or there's some curse upon the land where the portal opens every 50 years and the Sasquatch comes out and wreaks havoc for a little bit and then goes back to wherever it came from. And the other thing that you wonder when you see stuff like this is, okay, so if there had been somebody who was of a Fortean bent who was doing these interviews, what other weird stuff was going on in this neighborhood?
Yeah.
Because it's just, the whole thing about stealing milk just really put me on to the whole, okay, what is going on in this neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. You have one here where the case wasn't particularly overly interesting, but they measure the creature's height at 10 to 15 feet.
That was Bighorn Dam.
Yeah, so the site or the footprints measured almost 16 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a quote here saying CBC contacted an expert, of course, who immediately honed in on the height estimate and the size of the alleged tracks, calling both measurements exaggerated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this bugs you for very good reason.
Don't get me going about experts. It's like, excuse me? You're an expert in Sasquatch. Oh, well, okay. So you've actually had close encounters with these creatures. You've been able to, take DNA samples. You've done all of this stuff. You've done all the biology stuff. Maybe you actually bought in a sample. No, then you're not an expert in Sasquatch.
Right.
You're conjecturing just like everybody else. I mean, that's one of the things that drives me crazy. The other thing, and this is, I may have talked about this in one of the other episodes, but I'm going to do it again because I'm me. That whole business about, Sasquatches are approximately 8 to 10 feet tall and they weigh blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, I could see where you could derive that as maybe an average height that people describe in a lot of encounters. Because you do see that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
People, 6 feet, 8 feet, 7 feet. You probably average it out that Sasquatch is somewhere around 8 feet tall. But and I'm pretty sure I pointed this out before. Here's the deal. I'm 6'7". The average average male in North America is something like 5'10". Does that mean that I don't exist because I don't fall within the quote unquote normal height range?
Correct.
I mean, I'm very tall and I have smaller feet. I know guys that are, 2 or 3 inches shorter than me that wear size 15 shoes. I get on to about a 13 double triple E, right? I mean, my feet are not as long, but they're kind of broad. I have duck feet. What can I say? But, this whole business of some joker coming in and telling me that he's an expert in Sasquatch, first of all, because there is no such thing.
Right.
And then telling me that, this witness is suspect or didn't see what they thought they saw because they estimated the height at 10 to 15 feet based on their observation and their measurements taken against a tree that they were observing during the time that they were watching this creature walk. They have just as much right to say the creature is 10 to 15 feet tall as I do to say that I'm 6'7". I mean... And it's ridiculous the thing that I talk about in that particular, so this was the Bighorn Dam sighting. That's one of the ones that where they had a description of a really tall Sasquatch. But in that particular circumstance, the people who wrote the book, and I can't recall off the top of my head who it was, but the people who bent over backwards to come up with this extravagant explanation for why these witnesses didn't see what they saw.
Yeah.
Why not just believe the witness? You're talking about a giant bipedal hominid / ape that conventional biology laughs about. Believe your witnesses. If your witness is telling you that the thing was 10 feet tall, then it was 10 feet tall. I mean, there's no reason not to believe that.
Yeah.
Until somebody puts one on a table and we get the Jane Goodall of Sasquatch.
Right.
We're going to have to make do with conjecture and base our statements on what people have reported, but you can't say that that's necessarily fact. And this is one of the big mistakes that you see, in a lot of these Bigfoot shows and all that kind of stuff. have a great deal of respect for anybody who spends, a lot of time out in the woods looking for Sasquatch. That takes a special kind of dedication.
Absolutely.
Going out there, beating on trees and playing calls and doing all that stuff. It's a great way to spend some time in the outdoors, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And they are talking to people and they're getting witness accounts and they're adding to the general body of knowledge that we have about whatever Sasquatch is. Yeah. And I admire the heck out of people who do that stuff. But just because you've spent 20 years collecting witness reports from people doesn't make you an expert on anything.
Nope.
It makes you an expert on what people have told you.
You're right. You're an expert on collecting reports.
Yeah, you're an expert on what people have told you. Yeah. Now, if you say something like, well, the majority of witnesses say that Sasquatches are X feet tall, and I base that on the data that I've collected over 20 years and, 250,000 sightings or whatever. Okay, but you can't say that somebody's wrong because they're outside of your norm.
And how many people have reported, say, a 10-foot tall Sasquatch, and the person taking the report goes, "No, you must be wrong. It's only we'll say 7 feet." Yeah, and then they put 7 feet in the report because 10 feet's ridiculous. They can't be 10 feet tall.
They couldn't possibly be that.
And so you eventually
be as tall as I am.
Right. And you eventually get enough cases where that happens, where if the data was left in accurately, you would have a different data pool.
Well, and we've had this discussion previously. It's like anomalous lights.
Yeah.
Or UFO sightings in the area, or if you ask these witnesses if they've had any other unusual experiences, you might discover that Sasquatch is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
With some of these folks. Now, some people it's a one-off thing. They're driving down the road. Hey, there's a Sasquatch. Okay.
Yep.
But other people have had lives of high strangeness, but they're reluctant to share that stuff with people because, if you start telling people that you saw a UFO and then there was a Sasquatch in the woods the next day or whatever, then they start looking at you funny.
Sure.
Unless they're Stan Gordan, in which case he says, yeah, that happens all the time.
Well, I mean, the thing is, all this stuff has some interconnection to it. It may not be the same thing.
Yeah.
But there's something about how we perceive it that's similar. So some people are more likely to perceive it than others. So if you have one, you're probably going to have other things happen to you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that whole perception thing is so important.
Yeah.
And it's something that doesn't get enough attention. We spend all of our time talking about, this is a really reliable witness and so on and so forth. It's like, but even people who have mental illnesses, schizophrenia, for example, have like an internal logic to their delusion, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, if we can step into their perception, then we can actually start to understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all view the world completely differently because we've experienced different things. Our senses are a little bit different. Our opinions that are formed and memories and all this. I mean, even twins have a different experience of the world.
Oh, my spouse and I disagree on colors all the time. It's like, that's green. No, that's blue. No, that's green. No, I'm telling you, it's blue. It happens.
Yeah.
Everybody's perception is of something or an event is going to be a little bit different. And we need to listen to that. We need to listen to the nuances of that, and we need to understand that there's no black and white because the primary evidence for these creatures is anecdotal.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are footprints and all that other stuff, and I'm going to talk about that a lot in the Poltergeist book. But other than the somewhat contrary physical evidence that we find for these creatures, the primary evidence is eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
And eyewitness testimony in and of itself, is a matter of perception.
Not only
so the one person is going to see a monster, and the other person is going to say, "Hey, look, it's a big monkey."
Yeah.
Just as a kind of an example. I mean, two people can have completely different reactions to seeing what apparently is the same type of creature.
And with paranormal, was it you that had the case where someone saw something that was a different color? Was it in your one of your monsters?
That sounds familiar.
like one of them saw it as a black creature, and the other person saw it as a white creature.
White creature, yes. And I can't remember what book that was in now. It might have been Mysteries in the Mist, or it could have been Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, either one. But yeah. And so of course the flesh and blood researcher is going to say, well, they saw two different creatures,
right?
And I'm going to say, well, not necessarily.
There's a lot to factor in there.
Yeah.
And I think too, the thing is, when you're looking at this as a flesh and blood creature, and UFOs are aliens and ghosts are dead people, why would someone have a combination of those experiences? But when you realize, okay, that may not be what we're dealing with, then it's a little more acceptable to understand why they may be connected.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the vast energetic soup that surrounds us, and some people seem to have an ability to tune into, for want of a better word, a specific frequency, then, there's no telling what you might encounter.
Yeah, exactly. Let's jump up to the Thule people, who are the ancestors of the Inuit.
Yeah,
and they're talking about giants, right?
Yeah. Let me just a second here. So the First Nations folks this is in Labrador, which is in the area around. I think I'm never quite clear on how you differentiate between Newfoundland and Labrador, because the province is actually called Newfoundland and Labrador. So this is actually in Labrador, and this is I think you're talking about the Inuit legend of the.
Yes,
I'm gonna slaughter this, I'm sure. Tuniit.
Yeah,
it's a TUN and two I's and a T. So they were a race of people, and they were considered people who were regarded by these Inuit forebearers, the Thule people, as which is an interesting name in and of itself.
Yes,
might be Thule. I think it's Thule, Greenland. They were considered to be both ancestors and like devils or spirits or whatever, which falls right into Joshua's bailiwick of, there seem to be human remnants, whatever you want to call those, ghosts or ancestors or whatever, that eventually just have hung around so long that they become part of the spiritual ecology of a particular place.
Yeah.
So, yeah, see, Josh, I did read some of the book. So these beings were said to be a lot stronger than human beings and have very long arms and legs. Now, I mean, it's possible that we could be talking about, early hominid type people that had survived into that era, like the Neanderthals, or, I'm blanking out there, but you get the idea.
There's the race too that like people like Andrew Collins think represented the Anunnaki.
Was it Homo erectus?
No, there was a specific tribe because they were very tall.
Yeah. But anyway, so these guys were, longer armed. They were taller. We didn't get a strong indication of them being hairy from what I read, but they give you the impression that they must have been hairy because the Tuniit were personified as great white bears. And you think, oh, well, they're talking about polar bears, except that polar bears don't use stone implements.
Yeah.
These beings apparently used stone implements, but were best known for actually stealing the stuff they couldn't figure out how to make. So they were constantly kipping the Thule people's kayaks and bows and such because they couldn't figure out how to make those things. They were tolerated because they were just a whole lot bigger than these other guys. It's kind of like, you just let the bully have your bow. It's okay. You can make another one.
Yeah.
You can't make another head. So eventually, though, these people rose up against the Tuniit and apparently hunted them to near extinction. But the interesting thing is that, according to the Inuit, as late as the 1930s, there were some of these creatures, Tuniit, surviving in the Torn Gap Mountains. Now, if you have ever seen pictures of the Torn Gap Mountains, that is a rugged place. So I could see where if you were a species of hominid or whatever that had worn out its welcome, that might be a place to go. Particularly if you had fur and you didn't have to worry too much about freezing to death. But it's a very rugged area one I'd like to visit sometime. So I've seen some really interesting video of that area. And, of course, the Inuit weren't the only people. The Cree First Nations people also had something that they simply referred to as the hairy creature. And these things are so much a part of the tribal mythology that the Cree actually have a hairy creature lake and a hairy creature mountain in Labrador.
Nice.
Both of these have stories attached to them too, which you can read about in my book. See, I can do that sales thing sometime.
All right, let's look at, and your book is very well worth reading. For anyone who's wondering, we're even as much as we've talked about it here, there's a ton more stuff in these books.
I do like to collect stories.
Yes, and they're presented very well. It's a nice, fun read with a lot of information, and that's the best combo you can have.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So let's talk about William Decker.
Oh yes. So Mr. Decker, this is another one of those stories out of Labrador, the Newfoundland Labrador area. This is 1895. And this is one of those rare stories where a hunter actually brings down a Sasquatch, or seems to. So he is a resident of one of the numerous small settlements at the extreme northern end of the Great Northern Peninsula in Labrador. Goes off on a hunting trip. And here we go. Here's another Sasquatch and marsh or bog story. He's in the boggy southwest hinterlands of Pistole Bay. Making his way across a frozen quagmire when he hears the vocalization. It's like the hallmark Sasquatch thing. He hears an unearthly cry. He turns to face this sound in the direction of the sound, and he sees this quote unquote enormous beast man moving toward him in tremendous bounds. Now, this is 1895, right? We don't have, even semi-automatic weapons, really.
Yeah.
He's using a muzzle loader. But he had time to point this thing at the creature and pull the trigger. And this beast was so close to him, he could actually smell its breath when it went down. It was very, very close range. Those old muzzle loaders had huge caliber ammunition. So, if you were going to bring a Sasquatch down, that would be the thing to do it with, probably. So he brought the creature down, but almost as soon as it went down, it started to get back up. So he's backpedaling and trying to reload this thing. Now, if you've ever watch historical recreation videos of somebody trying to load a muzzle loader. It's like a 15,000 step process.
Yep.
So this poor guy has this Sasquatch that he's already shot, right? That's coming back up at him, and he's trying to reload this thing. He manages to ram home the charge in time to fire on the thing again and bring it down again. This time, apparently permanently. But just to be on the safe side, he puts another charge in and takes a third shot at the creature before determining that it was dead. He took some measurements. This creature was said to be 3.5 meters tall, with an arm span of 4 meters. So for those of you who are metrically challenged, that's about 11.5 feet tall, with an arm span of slightly over 13 feet. He estimated the weight at about 450 kilograms, which would be about 992 pounds. Animals covered in long, dark hair, and its tracks were so large that they dwarfed Decker's feet, even with snowshoes on. So it gives you an idea how big this creature was. I mean, this was obviously, we're talking, he says 11.5 feet tall. This is, again, one of those creatures that falls outside the normal range of Sasquatch height.
That's what I was going to point out.
Size, for that matter.
Yeah.
This was a big boy.
And of course, there was no concept of Bigfoot back then.
Yeah, it was just a wild man, right?
Yeah.
This is what they called them back then. He calls it a beast man in the I guess his journal or whatever.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is as with all of these stories where, occasionally you run across a story where there was one earlier in the book where a young man, 17 years old, fires on what he thinks is the back end of a moose and ends up downing Sasquatch. It was during World War II. He didn't want to make a stink. He was hunting illegally, so he didn't go back. He never went back. No body recovered, right? Decker, this body just disappears into the annals of history. We don't have any idea what he did with it, or if he did anything with it. He may have just left it and gone on. I don't imagine that Sasquatch would be good eating. I don't know.
Yeah, probably
probably tastes like chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they eat bear up there, so I would think that somebody might try Sasquatch, except that one of the things that keeps people from shooting at these creatures more often is that they resemble us so much.
Yeah.
That people are a little, they look through the scope and they're looking at a face and facial expressions and all this stuff, and they're not inclined to shoot at the thing.
Yeah.
Now, what caused this particular Sasquatch to have such an aggressive reaction to Decker, we don't know. It might be a territorial thing. There's no telling.
Watch this, guys. I'm going to scare this guy.
Yeah, it could be. It could be something as simple as that. It could be, hey, check it out. I'm going to scare the crap out of this dude.
Oh, man, he shot Bob. Let's run.
Yeah. And then the others, disappeared into the brush. Yeah. So again, that Sasquatch body disappears into the annals of history, just like all the others have so far.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're ever actually going to find a physical sample of this critter. I don't put it outside the realm of possibility, but
sure.
It just seems like, getting a Sasquatch body is about as easy as getting a picture of a Sasquatch.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to do.
So you actually entitle one section to this, "Why did the Sasquatch cross the road?"
Yes. Well, because, you think about it. You listen to the Sasquatch podcast, you read the books about Sasquatch. And if you had to sit down and say, okay, here is a typical Sasquatch encounter, it would go something like this. Joe Schmo is driving down the road. He's on a highway somewhere. He's driving along at a pretty good clip, and he sees something out of the corner of his eye. He turns and he looks at it, and son of a gun, he starts to slow down because there's an 8-foot-tall, hairy bipedal hominid walking, along the side of the road. Alternatively, Joe Schmo is driving down a road in the country, and he's, maybe progressing at a fairly slow pace, or maybe not. Maybe he's really clipping along. And son of a gun, this thing, he sees something out of the corner of his eye. Son of a gun, this thing comes out of the trees. 8-foot-tall, bipedal, hairy hominid walks across the road in front of him, disappears into the forest. That seems to be the most common Sasquatch sighting out there.
Yeah.
I have one in the book that's actually in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is a town of 150,000 people. Where a couple of truckers were driving along the Queen Elizabeth Parkway and saw Sasquatch down in one of the hollows off of the highway. It is the most common thing that we see and so I decided that instead of including a bunch of these reports throughout the book, I was just going to kind of clump them together and talk a little bit about roads and stuff. Because roads are liminal places. This is something that people don't think about, is roads are liminal places. They're neither here nor there. They're how you get from here to there.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have a touch of liminality going on there. You also have a situation where people are driving, sometimes long distances, sometimes in very wilderness areas, and you get that highway hypnosis thing going, which I think lends itself to, and I talked about this in the Phantom Black Dog book too, it lends itself to psychic perception, because you're in that relaxed, not thinking about a whole lot of anything state of mind. Yeah. That kind of alpha brainwave consciousness where psi seems to function best. Now, the question is, is it because of the psi function that some people are able to see these creatures, and that opens up a whole other can of worms about what Sasquatch is. But it seems like a lot of these roadside sightings are characterized by a couple of things. One is, the person's driving along. It's a, fairly isolated highway. They've been driving for a little bit. They're probably in a very receptive state of mind. The other is that a lot of times the Sasquatch doesn't seem to acknowledge their existence at all.
Yeah.
And this is something that's always puzzled, and it's the flesh and blood researchers, they find this very puzzling. So Sasquatch is like, walking down the side of the road, and then it walks off into the woods, and it's like there wasn't anything there, and they don't care. Or they'll walk it right out in front of a car going 60 or 70 miles an hour, like just blithely. People have had to slam on their brakes and swerve to try and avoid these things in the roads. Like it's almost like these creatures are slightly out of phase with our reality, and then maybe you're not seeing us. Maybe we're seeing them in their reality, but they're not seeing us in our reality. Which again opens up a whole other can of worms.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that that's absolutely the case, but it's an interesting theory.
Yeah.
And it would explain why so often these creatures just seem to ignore us completely when they're walking down the side of the road. The ones that pay attention to people seem to be the ones that encounter you out in the woods somewhere. But those roadside sightings, a lot of times, it's like Sasquatch is headed off to the grocery store and he's got his head in the clouds and he's not paying attention to you at all.
Right. Yeah, so, you don't matter. You're just a vehicle.
Yeah, it's just a car or whatever. But yeah, I mean, and like I said, in the Phantom Black Dog book, I talk a good bit about that because black dogs being more of an apparition. We can certainly get into that. Free flowing psi aspect of the road, because a lot of black dog sightings happen. Almost all black dog sightings happen on a road. A lot of times when somebody's been walking for a while, which again is kind of trance-inducing as well. It's interesting because, as I say, roads are liminal places. They're neither here nor there, which is also very, in fairy lore, they call places like that betwixt and between.
Yeah.
And those are places where the veil between the worlds is considered to be thinnest. Maybe Sasquatch is taking advantage of the thinness of the veil there next to the road to make itself known. Who knows?
The one of the other observations you make that other people have made as well is that a lot of times these things will bother people who are parking, making out, stuff like that, lovers' lanes and things like that. And my thought on that is you're generating a lot of energy.
Yep.
Like whether you want to call it orgone energy or whatever, there's a lot of potential PK energy there. So something might be drawn to it, or it might be creating it with the energy, Well,
I mean, if you think about that for a minute, if you set aside maybe not. Even with the flesh and blood hypothesis, if you have a creature that's enormously sensitive, that lives out in the woods and it has highly honed senses, then the combination of the smells you're putting, the pheromones that you're putting out, whatever little sounds you're making, all those kinds of things, and the electrical charge that you're putting off, might be enough to attract an animal like a flesh and blood creature.
Oh yeah.
If we get into the whole, if we get into the whole more supernatural or other dimensional aspect of what a Sasquatch can be, then basically what you've done is you parked your car on the side of the road and you lit a bonfire.
Yeah.
And because it's not just Sasquatch. There's dogman encounters that happen like that. There's other quote unquote monsters that seem to show up when people are making out, or whatever it is they're doing in the backseat of their car, right? Going to keep this PG because I know we're we're doing the radio thing here.
Well, sexual energy in itself is very potent energy.
Exactly. As you are aware with the whole Kundalini aspect of things.
Yep.
That energy draws things in.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not sometimes. And then not only that, but if you're talking about the creation of something. I don't know that might be a possibility, I guess, but I would think that you'd have to have a pretty specific set of circumstances to make that happen. Because the thought form thing, there's something called the triangle of causation, which is basically desire, imagination, and I just did a lecture on this. And visualization.
Right.
So it's basically the idea is that you have to have a very strong desire to create something. You have to have a really strong visual image of that thing. And you have to be able to do like a novelist does and put it into motion. And that's the basic ingredients to creating a thought form in magical thought, right? So what happens, in a situation where you have a couple who are engaged in whatever it is they're engaged in the backseat of their car. They're producing a lot of energy. You don't know what's going through people's minds during that time period. And maybe she's a little bored and she's thinking, her mind wanders off. Or maybe he's a little bored and his mind wanders off. But there's still all that energy there that can be channeled into whatever that form is. So it's possible. I wouldn't think that would be the ideal circumstance for creating a thought form, but if
I like to just look at all the possibilities.
The other possibility is that we've talked about the idea that that there's actually a physical creature and that there's a spiritual or otherworldly creature that is mimicking that that physical creature. Maybe there's a small population of these bipedal hominids that live off in the deep Canadian forest somewhere, but there's a otherworldly creature that says, that's a great form to take. That'll scare the crap out of people. And so if one of these things happens to be in your vicinity when you're making out with your significant other in the backseat of a car, oh, wow, look at all that free energy that I can borrow to take form. Whoosh, here I am. And I'm going to scare the crap out of you by, bouncing your car up and down, or like the one police officer where the Sasquatch actually picked up the back of his car. It's like, dude, I think at that point I would be like, okay, I'm out of here. And I'm taking the big gun with me.
Let's move up to Susan MacLeod.
Oh yes, okay.
If I'm saying that right,
I think it's MacLeod.
Okay,
it's Scottish. So
okay.
And let's see, that was the story out of Mike Clelland's book.
Yes,
right?
Yes, it was.
So this particular individual was an indigenous person. I forget which tribe. Story comes from Mike Clelland's book, The Messengers, which, if you've not read this book, it's definitely one to put on your list.
Oh yeah.
I love Mike's idea that paranormal / abduction, basically Fortean phenomena are actually initiatic experiences. Because we have pretty much blown up our initiatic experiences here in the West. Mm-hmm. So there's no way for a shaman or somebody who has concourse with the other world to be initiated into that world except having an experience like this now. It's not like you can go to your local shaman down the street and say, hey, I've been having these weird dreams and I want to know more about this.
Yeah.
Unless you're really lucky, and you happen to live in a indigenous community or something. So anyway, the subject of the story is a woman named Susan MacLeod. She lived in Ontario, and she is of Mi'kmaq ancestry, what people call Micmac. And I found this story really interesting because this person has an indigenous viewpoint of what was going on, while at the same time being able to share with Michael, look, there's all this weird stuff that's happening. The summer of 2015, if you've read the book, you know that one of the features of the book is strange owl experiences, people seeing giant owls and owls appearing in strange places and all that sort of thing. So she'd had a lot of that going on, and had some other things that looked like UFO abduction experiences. But in this particular circumstance, it was August 15th, 2015. Susan MacLeod had undergone a painful dental procedure and had gone out to a small teepee on her property. to spend some time meditating. And she was also mourning the passing of a friend. While she was there, which again is interesting because again, we've got, Joshua's ecology, the soul thing factoring in with all of the, the recently dead kind of energy happening there too. So she was in the teepee and, classic Sasquatch encounter has the damp, musky odor. And here's something actually brushing along the side of the teepee. For those who aren't familiar, the teepee is actually it's a structure that's built in the round. It's a set of poles that are set up at cross purposes, and then hide is wrapped around it to form it's basically a tent with a smoke hole in the middle. And was used by particularly Plains tribes because it was easy to take down and put back up. For their living area. So heard something brushing the structure. She found that a little unnerving. She comes out of the teepee and sees these two red lights and then realizes that the lights are eyes and that there are several sets of eyes looking at her from the woods around her home. In all, she discerned what she felt were 5 Sasquatch, 2 that were taller and 3 that were shorter. And at very close range. She claims to have been within 20 feet of these creatures. She decides maybe the teepee is not the safest place to be, makes her way back to the house. She notes that, these hairy ones are still present, but they've moved off to a more comfortable distance. Now, here's where it gets weird. Now, this whole story is in the chapter called Strange Things. So... when she gets back into the house, her children are just losing it because they're telling her stories about all these shadow shapes, call them shadow people, flying all through the house while she was out having her Sasquatch experience.
Yeah.
She checks in with her partner, who had been camped out in the garage, basically, and he also saw these strange shadow people. So she wasn't sure whether the Sasquatch related to the shadow stuff or not, but, as is the way amongst Native people, she decided she was going to start offering some prayers and asking for divine assistance in dealing with this outbreak of weirdness, right? It doesn't make it clear exactly where she was when she was doing this, but apparently at some point she made her way back outside and she sees 3 stars, what she thinks are 3 stars, but then the stars start to move and form into a classic triangle UFO. She calls her partner out. They watch this thing. There's like a semi-solid mass to whatever this is that's flying over the top of their house. So the question comes up then, if Sasquatch is a flesh and blood animal, why is it appearing in tandem with all these other strange experiences?
Right.
It's one thing to see shadow people. It's another thing to see a UFO. It's another thing to see a Sasquatch.
Unless it's not.
All 3 in one night?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's strange credulity. I'm sorry. There's something more going on there.
Yeah.
Whether you want to say that an interdimensional portal opened in the woods outside of her home, whether you want to say that her meditations and prayers put her into an altered perception and that altered perception apparently bled over to her entire family. You can try to explain it any number of ways, but the long and short of it is, that whatever she was seeing was extremely, extremely weird.
Yes.
And it was, it was like a perfect storm of Fortean events all in one night. I had to include that story in the book because it was just so strange.
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting story.
There's just no easy way to explain that one, And
I probably talked about it with Mike Clelland when he was on for that book, but I didn't remember it. So you also have it here. What was this one? This is the one where it transmits thoughts in Alberta. Alberta Sasquatch report number 041.
Yeah. So just back to Susan MacLeod for just a minute.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's. I have theorized in other books that the sites of people doing what, for better or worse, can be called magical work Whether we're talking about one of the famous places for Fortean phenomena is the Navajo Reservation, which has, its own intense ritual sequence, the nation does. And those rituals are performed on a very regular basis. Whether you're talking about a place like Boleskine House, where Aleister Crowley is alleged to have done some workings. He was apparently trying to do the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel there. All of these places seem to, or not all of these, but some of the places that we're aware of seem to also be the sites of strange phenomena.
Sure.
So I've theorized in the past that, with the boom in occult literature being available out there for anybody to get their hands on. I mean, all you have to do is walk into the Barnes and Noble, right? You can find 50 different books on magic. With all the people out there doing all of this stuff, it seems like there's more opportunities for people to be creating weaknesses in what we think of as the veil between the worlds.
Or generating more energy.
Or generating more energy. I mean, it's not really an or. I think it's an and.
Yes. Yeah.
They're creating they're raising energy, and they're opening ways, because a lot of this stuff involves summoning spirits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, spirits have to come from somewhere, right? So there's so many people out there now that are aware of this stuff, and some of whom are practicing it regularly. It seems like there's more opportunity for those kind of weak spots to develop. And again, there's all of those beacons being lit out there, calling things into from the other world. So, this particular person seems to have been somewhat traditional in her outlook, and probably practiced some of the rituals and stuff of her people. And, that may be part of the reason why the weirdness was happening, because the veil was a little thinner there, or she was able to see these things, and her family as well. But anyway, so Sasquatch thoughts. This is a fun story. This happens in Strathcona Island Park in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which is not it's not like, there's New York City all around it, but it's not like a totally wilderness area.
Yeah.
It's just a group of people who are out on a family picnic. So, they get a fire going. They do this is August of 1972. So they do the typical thing. They get a fire going. They go down to the river and they're swimming, having a good time, wearing the kids out, right? If those of you who are parents out there who have been parents, know that it's very important to tire your children out before bedtime. In this particular circumstance, though, it was about 1:30 in the afternoon. The family decided they were going to go back to the campsite. And this young witness, who, of course, decided to remain anonymous, but this young witness, takes off. He's going to be the first person to get his hot dog. That's his whole goal in life. So he ran ahead of the group. And again, first intimation that there's something wrong or something weird going on, he smells this odor. He describes it as being like a newly washed dog that had been rolling in garbage for a week, which seems pretty apt. He looks up through the bush. He sees a movement in the bush, and he looks up and he sees a large black and red furred back. And he's about 30 feet away from this thing. Whatever it was that he was looking at was squatting, because he could see its buttocks.
Yeah.
Its buttocks were just inches from the ground. It was hunched over a Saskatoon berry bush. So there you got berries again. It must have been pretty large, because even squatting, this thing was, 4 feet tall, or 5 feet tall, and probably 4 feet wide, and had the typical cone-shaped head, that sat directly on its shoulders, didn't seem to have much of a neck. Classic Sasquatch, right?
Right.
So, this sounds like any of a half a dozen or more stories that we've talked about in this book so far. But this boy was not aware of what a Sasquatch was. It's 1972. So, I guess Legend of Boggy Creek had been out, but, this is Canada. There's probably not as much exposure to that kind of stuff. They probably heard about the abominable snowman, maybe in the paper if they read that kind of stuff, but you just didn't have the exposure back then.
It wasn't in the common culture.
Yeah, you don't have Finding Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So he's thinking to himself, he's thinking out loud or thinking to himself, what am I looking at? And something inside his mind replies, you don't see me, I'm not here. So the witness is like, what? And again, he hears the words, you don't see me, I'm not here. Now, the witness was like, I'm looking at you. What do you mean I don't see you? So this being starts to make a chattering noise. And the witness says that his mind was filled with thoughts of, I need to leave now. And so he takes off running to his campsite, and the Sasquatch heads off in another direction toward a nearby creek. So the witness, of course, he goes running back into camp. It's like, I saw this big thing in the woods, and and they were like, you saw a bear.
Right.
He said, no, that wasn't a bear. I know what a bear looks like. That was no bear. So somebody in the family was joking that he'd seen a Sasquatch. He had no idea what they were talking about. They had to tell him what it was. And at that point, he says, yeah, that's what I saw. That was a Sasquatch. Now, if the witness had just been overwhelmed with the desire to leave the area, his thoughts had filled with a desire to leave, then most of your flesh and blood researchers would say, oh, well, it's infra-sound, right?
Yeah.
But the witness very clearly heard in his mind this being communicating with him twice, telling him, you don't see me, I'm not here. Now, there's the theory out there that the Sasquatch is able to cloak itself. I don't know if they're cloaking themselves. Maybe they're manipulating people psychically.
Right.
It's like, you don't see me, I'm not here. And the witness turns and looks in the other direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could, it's kind of like the Jedi mind trick. It works on people unless they're strong-willed, right?
Right.
And most people would be like, oh, okay, I'll just look over here while the creature goes the other direction.
Yeah. What am I looking at? I'm not here. Oh, okay, good.
That's good. I don't have to, my mind doesn't have to grasp that I'm looking at something that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And there you go. So, we may be looking at an example of a Sasquatch using basically the Jedi mind trick on somebody, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Kind of like, that stuff doesn't work on me.
All right, let's take a quick...
That was a very poor Toydarian imitation, but anyway.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Quick mid-show break here and a recommendation for you. So first of all, contact info. If you have a story you want to share with us that we can talk about on a reader's story or a listener's story show in the future, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com is the place to send them. And if you want to share a story that you don't want to have to, read on the air, you can do that as well. I will respond eventually. I try to respond to everything, but there's a lot to go through on a daily basis. So if I miss you, you can always hit me up again and kind of poke at me. Contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com is the general contact for the show. And of course, the website is wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can find everything there, all our social media from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube and everything else. Also shows right back to the beginning. All right. If you want to mail me anything, you can do so at P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. And if you like metal, especially if you're looking for things new and interesting or old and interesting, you can check out my music show, The Last Exit for the Lost, and that's at thelastexit.org, and there's tons of archived shows there, as well as a new weekly show every single week. All right, as for recommendations, I'm going to go back to Dan Simmons. For a long time, Dan Simmons was my favorite author. And he wrote a book called Phases of Gravity, which sounds like a sci-fi novel, but it's not. It's it's just a very good book. It's very introspective. It's about a guy who went to the moon and is dealing with aging, basically getting older. Afterwards, and it's just such a good book. But like I said, it's not sci-fi. There's nothing paranormal about it. But Dan Simmons is just a brilliant writer, and that came out, I think, in the very late. I think it was like '89. It was published initially, and I haven't read it in quite some time. But it always is stuck in my head because it was just such a great story. So that would be my recommendation this week. If you're looking for some new fiction to read and you haven't checked that out, most of Dan Simmons' stuff is good. I haven't read it all. So I can't vouch for everything he's ever written, but he's a damn good author. All right, let's go back to our show. And I am here talking with Travis Watson about his Sasquatch Canada book. This is the third episode about your Sasquatch Canada book.
Yes, indeed, it is.
And
we were just discussing the strangeness of Sasquatch using Jedi mind tricks on people to make them look the other way and make their escape. So for those of you who thought I was a flesh and blood theorist, sorry.
The next one I had marked down was out of an interview with a Sasquatch researcher.
Oh yeah, I love this one. So this individual, this is the one I'm thinking of. This is the disappearing Sasquatch, right?
I think so.
The one in Whitehorse.
Yep, where he just disappears by the utility pole.
So this article comes from a guy who's interviewing a Sasquatch researcher who is telling this story. So it's kind of third hand, but the story was so much fun that I had to include it. Again, if I recall, this fellow was an Indigenous person. There's a lot of Indigenous folks up in the Northwest Territories in the Whitehorse area anyway. He's driving down the road close to Whitehorse, and he sees a Sasquatch. And, as I've said in previous episodes, the native folk, they have a name. All of the tribes have a name for this creature. They all accept that this is a real thing. Some of them view it as more flesh and blood, just like Sasquatch researchers, and others view it as more of a spiritual being. But in any case, he knew what he was looking at. He knew that it was a Sasquatch. The weird part about this story, though, is as he's watching this thing making its way along the cut space for utility poles, it gradually starts to lose solidity, and he becomes aware that it is becoming translucent. And then as he watches it, it disappears completely. Now, there's a lot of folks out there that, a lot of the flesh and blood researchers who are like, oh, well, these stories of Sasquatch disappearing are simply, the Sasquatch is so fast that it just disappears into the woods when you drop your attention away from it. I can buy that, in certain circumstances. There's also the theory that Sasquatch uses infra-sound to disrupt your perception so that it can make its escape.
Right.
Okay. That's fine. I can, we're getting dangerously close to giving Sasquatch superpowers at that point.
Right.
But, okay. I'm good with that. I can buy that there's a biological possibility that would happen. But when you tell me that you stood and watched something disappear, that's not infrasound. That's not, it just slipped off into the woods. It disappeared. It just disappeared. It was there, and it got less and less solid, and then it wasn't there. So again, I never exclude the possibility that there is a small population of, bipedal hominids wandering around out in the Canadian woods, because there's so much room out there that if they're going to exist any place, it would be there. But there's also something much, much, much stranger going on. And, it's these kinds of stories that make us pay attention to that and make us want to investigate further. It's the mystery of it, and I go back to that a lot. If you don't have a tolerance for mystery in this field, you're probably in the wrong field, because a lot of this stuff is just never going to be explained, really. I don't know if we'll discover the explanation when we're dead.
Yeah, maybe not.
I like to hope so, but
we'll just have a bunch more questions once we're dead.
Yeah, probably.
The questions will change,
and then we'll have to come back here to investigate again.
Exactly. Let's see. There was one you had from Sasquatch Canada. That was investigator Red Grossinger, and that was a Yukon witness who encountered two creatures.
Oh yeah. So this is very kind of a similar story. So if I recall, this gentleman worked in as mine engineer or something along that line.
Yes,
but he was a safety inspector or something.
Yeah.
So he was on his way from one mine to another mine to do an inspection, and he decided that he was going to stop along a river and camp for the night rather than trying to drive straight through to his destination. He goes for a hike. He encounters two of these creatures, one of which appears to him to be, like the large alpha male type. The other appears to be a pregnant female. So he's more than a little concerned because he's blundered into these creatures, and he's thinking that blundering into a pregnant female, with its male companion is probably not the safest thing for him. So he tries to communicate with these creatures, basically kind of using sign language to indicate that he means no harm. And the impression that I get from reading this is that he's gesticulating at these creatures, and the creatures are looking at him like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? is he having a stroke? I don't know. What's going on with this guy? But that's kind of the impression that I got. But so he's trying to communicate, he's trying to indicate that he means no harm. He's kind of backing up slowly, and and he's kind of moving off to the side of the path to indicate to them that they should pass, and he's just going to go about his merry way, right? Mm-hmm. But rather than do that, these two Sasquatch walk off into the woods, and as he's watching them between the trees, he can still see them very clearly. They both disappear. Boom. No, there's no Jedi mind trick or anything going on there. But he makes a point of saying that he could see them clearly until the moment they disappeared. They didn't step behind a tree. They didn't run into the bushes. He's watching them, and they just disappeared. They poofed. They just poofed.
Yeah.
And those stories are not the only stories of Sasquatch disappearing. If you read, like Tom Powell's The Locals, he has several actually stories of Sasquatch disappearing. His theory, of course, is that the infra-sound was, scrambling people's brains, and that the Sasquatch were using that to escape. But regardless, that's quite a trick for a flesh and blood creature to just vanish.
Yes, it is, especially that one that large.
Yeah, it's one thing if it's a mouse, but we're talking about a being that's supposedly 8 feet tall or so, and weighs several hundred pounds. It's kind of hard for them to vanish.
Or 15 feet tall.
Yeah, or 10 or 15 feet tall.
Well, you make an interesting observation near the end of the book that when you read through these sightings, they're very prosaic. If you substituted like black bear or moose in them, they're not that weird. It's just that the fact that it's the Sasquatch that makes it weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things to me that argues that there might be a flesh and blood animal attached to some of these sightings.
Right.
Particularly the ones that happen out in the middle of nowhere. Where some guy's out hunting moose or whatever in the Canadian wilds, and he's 50 miles from the nearest town or whatever. It's entirely possible, just judging from the thickness of the brush in my area, it's entirely possible for me to believe that there's some kind of relict hominid or bipedal ape or whatever living out in the woods here. Because so many of these sightings are like, I was out hunting. I saw this thing. I watched it through the scope of my rifle for, however many minutes. And it did this thing. It was stripping leaves off of plants, and it was eating berries or whatever. Very, very normal behavior for an animal, right?
Yeah.
Or, like the special forces guy who saw the Sasquatch take a deer.
Yes.
It's like, hey, Sasquatch got to eat, right? You have all of these very, very prosaic events that, if you substituted bear for Sasquatch, nobody would think anything of it, right? It's the fact that this creature is not supposed to exist that gets people going.
Yeah.
And gets them into the investigation mode, right?
Well, the other thing.
So there's, like I said, there's your argument for there being some kind of a flesh and blood presence that these things are based on. But then we get into the strange things side of things, and vanishing Sasquatches and Sasquatches talking in people's minds, and doing all of these other kind of crazy things that are being seen in association with shadow people and UFOs and all that stuff. And then you get into, just as one of the things that's always, I've always thought was kind of fun about Sasquatch lore is that just when you start to think, oh, well, this is some kind of a bipedal creature running around in the woods, you run into a story like the one from Stan Gordan, where the woman walks out onto her porch with a shotgun and, faces off with a Bigfoot, and it raises its hands at her. and she thinks she's being attacked, and she shoots the thing, and it disappears in a flash of light.
Right.
Just as soon as you start to think that there's a flesh and blood explanation for this thing, you come across a weird story where Sasquatch vanishes, or it talks to somebody, or it starts leaving presence that demonstrates self-awareness for people, or whatever.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that makes Sasquatch research fun, I think, is you just never know what the next story is going to be like.
Well, because of the ridicule factor too, it's
right.
You have people who might report the Bigfoot part of it, but leave out the other weirdness because they're going, no one's going to believe me, and they're just going to make fun of me. And see, you don't know how many of these don't sound prosaic if you got the full story, which doesn't. And in some cases, there may not be anything else, but I'm sure there are cases where there are, and it's just left out. Or the investigator, or they tell the investigator, and the guy's like, "Well, I don't care about that. I'm just I'm just going to put the Bigfoot stuff in."
All I want to hear about is the stuff in my silo.
Yes, and the other thing you talk about is that with such a large number of people looking for this, we should have found something.
Yeah. At any given time, I'm sitting here right now in my nice warm basement in Kitchener, Ontario. But I can guarantee you that there's somebody out there in the woods, either actively looking for Sasquatch or at least open to the experience of Sasquatch somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There are so many people that, particularly with the massive media presence of Sasquatch now, starting with finding Bigfoot and ranging all the way to, Jack Links and the Don't Mess with Sasquatch ad campaign. The Sasquatch has become such a cultural icon now and generated so much interest that, there are tons of people looking for this thing, which, again, gives me some, cross reference back into the whole thought form thing, is like how many of these encounters are actually things that people created themselves.
Yeah.
But, we'll talk about that more in the Poltergeist book.
Yes.
But,
by this point, we should have found something.
Yeah, given the number of people that are looking for this critter, you would think that there would be, a compelling piece of video evidence. There would be, and granted, there have been some videos, Patterson Gimlin film and so forth. But, the problem with anything short of dragging a body in is that somebody's going to look at it and say, oh, well, that's photoshopped, or that's faked, or that's, whatever.
Especially nowadays.
When you can do all these wild special effects and, make people believe that there are dinosaurs wandering around in Jurassic World and whatever. But you would think, because there are people out there that are actively trying to shoot and bring in the Sasquatch, and they're working in what they consider to be active areas, and have had, at least partial sightings of these creatures. You'd figure that at some point somebody would get lucky and they'd be able to bring one in.
Yeah.
I have some issues with that.
Yeah, or a bone.
I have to say, or a bone, or something, something. But instead, what we get is footprints. We get, hair samples, questionable scats, things like the Skookum cast and so forth, which create a compelling circumstantial evidence. But unless you have a creature that you can attach it to, you actually have a live body, or a dead body, to attach it to, never are going to rise to the level of scientific proof. And that's what everybody's looking for is a lot of these folks are looking for scientific proof. And it's like, I don't know if we're ever going to get that, because I'm not sure that this creature is solid enough for us to get it.
And even if you had, say, a single bone where, an expert could look at it and be like, I don't know what animal this came from.
Right.
That doesn't prove it came from Bigfoot. It doesn't prove that it's a Sasquatch.
Yeah. Nothing short of hauling a Sasquatch body into the,
alive or dead,
center of town is good. Yeah. Is going to actually, quote unquote, prove it to the scientists.
Yeah.
Because, we've had any number of DNA samples that seem to indicate that there are creatures running around out there that are, a point or two away from being human being, that, it's unidentified DNA. But it's like, if you collect a DNA sample at a crime scene, and you the whoever left that sample is not in any of the databases, then all you can say is there was somebody there that we can't identify. And it's the same thing with the Sasquatch research, which just frustrates the hell out of people who are trying to, quote, prove that Sasquatch exists.
I suppose if you had a full skull, that might do it.
They did actually extrapolate the existence of Gigantopithecus from some teeth and a section of jawbone.
Right.
But if you produce something like that was like freshly dead, like wasn't like 10,000 years old or whatever, I think that you'd have a whole bunch of people crying hoax no matter what you did.
Well, true. Wasn't there a guy like a couple of years ago that said he had like a tooth or something like that, and it turned out just to be a scam? It looked like a scam from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't recall that particular event, but
I remember talking about it on the show, and we were kind of looking at it going, oh, this guy, because he like found it in Canada, but then he was like sneaking it across the border and secretly getting it tested and all this stuff, and it was kind of like, yeah, none of this sounds on the level.
Yeah, so it's like the more elaborate the story is around the evidence, the more, I'm inclined to cry BS.
I'm sure one of my listeners knows exactly what I'm talking about, and they can leave a comment and remind me what it was. It's a vague memory of it where he was like, I have proof, but then all the details attached to that proof were sketchy.
Yes, there's always proof, right?
And obviously, we haven't proven it. So clearly whatever quote proof he had wasn't anything.
Exactly. And I keep coming back to this. I'm not sure that we're ever going to prove that Sasquatch exists. Well, but on the other hand, if you could find an impartial jury, people who had no opinion one way or the other, and you put all this evidence in front of them, I think that you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there's something out there.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, people are seeing something.
Yeah, and that's my argument for My argument for all this stuff is that all of it tracks across human history, across human culture.
Yeah.
People are experiencing something. It doesn't tell us what it is, but it tells us that these experiences are real and that they're a human experience.
Yes.
If nothing else.
And that's the important thing, is that people recognize that the experience is real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so frustrating to hear people, I don't think that particular report was legitimate because, the Sasquatch was 10 feet taller.
Right.
I keep coming back to that. It's just a sore point for me. But, it's like, but it was real to that person.
Yes.
Whatever
the reality of the creature
whatever the heck happened, whatever the objective reality of Sasquatch is, that experience was real to that person. We have to remember that, as the people who are supposed to be investigating this stuff.
Yeah.
We have to remember that these people who are having experiences are having real experiences. And even if we think that the experience sounds just completely far out, I mean, I can imagine what a flesh and blood researcher would do with Susan MacLeod's story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one would go in the bin. But that was a real experience.
Yeah.
And people are having these real experiences all the time.
Yep.
And we have to remember that those, even if we don't particularly think that an event occurred, to the person who's telling us about it, if they're sincere, and a lot of witnesses are, most witnesses are,
I would say so,
it's real. It's real to them, and their reaction to it is real. And it's so real that some of these people end up with, what we could probably call PTSD.
Yes.
There's a certain percentage of Sasquatch witnesses that will never go in the forest again, ever.
And you also have a certain percentage that have a spiritual awakening because of it.
And you have a certain percentage that become obsessed with Sasquatch and end up in the woods all the time. So I mean, it depends on the person. It depends on where they are. But it's like I've said before. Mike Clelland mentions the idea that these experiences could be, shamanic or initiations, and I think there's a lot of good thinking there.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have those types of initiations available to the vast majority of people now.
Yes.
So I have to wonder if the powers that be didn't just decide, well, if they're not going to, do the shamanic work, then we're going to make them do the
Yeah, exactly. Or, I mean, it's always been there like that, but we understood it differently.
Right.
We had a framework to understand what was happening.
Right, yeah.
And we've lost that.
Yeah, we've lost it down in a sinkhole of scientific materialism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I love science as much as the next guy. But,
so do I. But it is narrow-minded, though.
Things that, there are some things that science has a lot of trouble dealing with, and this is one of those things.
Yep. All right, we're out of time. So your new book is Sasquatch Canada. It's available everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's mostly Amazon. You'll find it. It's available on Kindle. It's available as a paperback. It's even available on Kindle Unlimited for those of you who have that service.
Nice.
So read the book. If you like Sasquatch stuff, there's all kinds of stories in there. And I mean, like I said, main goal when I began working on the book was just to show that there were Sasquatch sightings all throughout Canada.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, oh, British Columbia is the place to be. And that's true. It's kind of Sasquatch central, but there are Sasquatch reports all over Canada.
Yeah.
And there's vast amounts of wilderness area for these creatures to exist in. So I had a great time researching the book, and I'm looking forward to getting the next one out.
And where can people find you online?
I'm on the 3 social medias: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Facebook, I have a W.T. Watson author page, or if you want to contact me personally, it's Will Watson. Long story about that one, but the Twitter handle is at WT Watson 2. And then Instagram is my weird one. That's one of the ones I used before I started writing. It's Curunir60, Curunir 60.
All right.
So those are the ways you can get hold of me. I'm always happy to see new folks, popping in. And, if you've got stories, I'm always willing to listen.
All right. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as always, Seriah.
I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons who help make this show possible, because without you, this show would be much, much less than what it is. And I want to give a special shout out to all of those pledging $10 or more: Illuminati, Greg Ross, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, Matthew Sproul, Andrew Nichols, Christine, a blue 2nd Gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Chris, CJ, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Russ Rouse, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunder Boy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so much for your support. So that was the end of my discussion with Travis about that book. I will have him back hopefully for a Wandering the Road episode with a couple other people. I think he'll fit in nicely. And you out there listening, most of you seem to really like him, so that works for me. I like him as well. So we'll bring him back soon, and of course he has another book coming up later this year. And we haven't talked to him about his Black Dog book yet either. So maybe we'll get to that as well. There is a Patreon segment with him, and it starts off in poltergeists and goes all over the place. It's a pretty interesting conversation. So that'll be going up for patrons later this week. And all right, I will see you all next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons. And we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.